Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another hot and humid edition of Rugby with Pads. If you're in the UK and listening to this, which I'm assuming most of you are, it's warm. Not gonna lie. I hope you guys are struggling through the heat as best you can and are going to make it through the other side. Apparently, it's going to get cold again eventually. But this is not a weather podcast. This is, in fact, a fantasy football podcast. And today, I wanted to do probably a long-awaited update, an intermediate version of the Fantasy 101. We did a Fantasy 101. We did an update last year, adding a couple more concepts into the 102. And this year, I want to talk about the 201. Give you guys some intermediate and advanced tips. It's all about evolution. It's all about bettering ourselves and increasing what we're doing and just getting better. So last year, I gave you the basics. I'll put some links in the chat, but effectively, first year I did some positional breakdowns, how they score in fantasy football. If you listen to this, hopefully you'll know that already, but if not, go back and listen. That's great. The year I looked at key events and things you need to know about the draft, about playoffs, all of that fun stuff. And last year I focused about what I think interests me and things like commissioning, leagues of record, best ball, dynasty, and all the other kinds of leagues, and introducing a few new topics that we introduced last year, like the Vampire League and the Zombie League that we did an edition of last year. This year is the 201. It should be an evolution. Now, I want to speak to you on what I think makes the game most playable and keeps it enjoyable as well. And that's really what I want to get onto. It's context for decisions and ultimately just some tips and tricks I've picked up over the last 10 years now to help make you better, hopefully, at fantasy football and to ultimately make it more enjoyable. So without waffling on, let's get into it. I've got 5 main points. They're in no particular order, but they kind of steer towards a view. And I'm going to, I'm going to limit it to 5. I could have gone down the rabbit hole here and broken these up, but let's just do 5 overarching points. And the first one I wanted to look at is the concept of value. Now, lots of people talk about value in different ways. They could think of draft value. They could think of positional value. They could think of all of these different things. But whatever you're talking about, in terms of value, it's what the impact that a certain player can have on your team. That is what value is described as and defined at. But I think there's more nuance than that. And I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about kind of comparing 2 players and how do you compare 2 players effectively. And I think there is, and also value changes as well. So this is where I came up with the idea of contextual value versus instinctive. Is that the way to say it? Instinctive value. What you kind of feel. What's your gut feel? It's really easy to get swept up by the hype, especially this time of year where it's all hype. Everyone's in the best shape of their lives. Everyone is getting more reps than the other guy, and there are infinite reps to go around. Eventually, that's not going to be the point. So my point here when you're looking at contextual value is not just to believe the hype, but to analyze everything. And hot takes just that. They are hot takes, especially in this hot weather. See, we brought it back to weather. Okay, what if I told you a statement like CJ Stroud is a league winner? I don't think many people would deny that's probably the case. But I think there's a second question to that. And this, my job in real life is to analyze things and to break things down into, what I see as being valuable lessons or advice that I give to my customers. But I would go and ask, and dig in. What scoring rules is it? Let's assume a throwing touchdown is worth 4 points and a running touchdown is worth 6. Is he more valuable or less valuable than Lamar? He's currently been taken nearly half a round ahead of Lamar at the moment. So let's break it down. Last year, and most years actually, Lamar averages about 5 rushing TDs a year, 800 yards on the ground. He eats up to 1,000, so he's got a really safe floor there as well. Averages about 25 throwing TDs. It's a different offense that we're going to see, but that's on about 3,000 to 3,500 yards on a 16-17 game season based on his tenure in the NFL so far after he took over from Joe Flacco. CJ Stroud, we've got a 1-year sample size. We think he's good. He's the new hotness. He's really young. He's going to be great. He's the next Patrick Mahomes. Okay, let's break it down then. CJ Stroud got kind of league average, 200 yards, a little bit of scrambling. And let's say this year he's going to score 2 rushing touchdowns, and let's say it's on 4,000 yards passing, which I think is probably good. He did about 4,200 last year. I think a little bit of regression to the mean is what we're probably going to see. Based on those alone and based on typical scoring rules, you've got a 60-point deficit on running yards. Yeah, Lamar is going to run 600 yards more. Let's say that. 18 points on touchdowns, on rushing touchdowns. Yeah, that's 3 touchdowns. But he gets about 50 points back when it comes to throwing yards. So he's gonna out throw him by 1,000 yards. Say. Either way, he's in a 28-point hole over the whole season. To have an equivalent season, he'd have to throw for 35 touchdowns with an improved running game. So is he going to throw as much? Maybe not. They're going to maybe control games more. They've got improved defense. Is he going to be on the field as much? We don't know. I think that regression to the mean is probably quite obvious. So I would say with him being in the same conversation as Lamar and Burrow and so on, he needs to get 35 to 40 touchdowns. He hasn't done that yet. Will he? Could he? Yes, possibly. What's the change he's got here? Have they invested heavily in the O-line? No, they haven't. Have they invested heavily in the run game? Yes, they have. Have they invested heavily in receivers? He had 2 great wide receivers. Yes, not for all the time. He made the most best of a bad bunch, but he's still got much the same core plus Stephon Diggs. If it was a 6-point passing game, it's a different question. But you'd still do the calculations, and he's still got to really perform really well to make it look like he's the equivalent of Lamar. And this is my point. It's all about the context that you're putting it in. And if you do the same calculation, because they're in that kind of grouping as well, just after, and it's a 6-point passing league, Burrow would have to score 15 to 20 more touchdowns, 10 to 15 more touchdowns than Lamar to make him valuable. So that's part of the context, understanding the environment you're playing in. The other aspect is, well, what secondary factors am I considering? Am I considering his age? I can't remember how old he is. I think he probably came into the league a little bit. Yeah, let's say he's 23 for the sake of argument. Lamar, 27, 28. In a dynasty, that matters. In redraft, it doesn't. So in redraft, you might just be looking at the scores on the table and making sure that you understand what their potential is, what their ceiling, what their floor is. But what about dynasty? I think age is overrated in Dynasty. I have won a league with a bunch of old guys. I've lost a league with a bunch of young guys. So it's all about what position you're in as well. So that's the other part of the context. Are you looking to rebuild over a case of 2 or 3 seasons? I don't think you should be doing it over more than 2. Or are you looking to win now? And my perspective is that I always want to win now. Why wouldn't you? What's your window of opportunity here? Does the rest of your team work out? Is it a case of perceived value against the rest of the league? I find that previous success is often an indicator of future value. So it's a lot safer with the likes of Lamar and Burrow that they're going to have good seasons, whereas they're going to be good for the next 2-3 years. But upside for the long term is perhaps all in Stroud's favour, but he could succumb to injury like anyone else. I think the last position to think about, and this is kind of formulating a team building way of thinking, is why are you drafting him? Where you're drafting, I'm picking on Stroud again a lot. I'm going to talk a lot about Texans because it's just been on my mind recently. Are you picking him to have a safe floor, or are you looking at spike weeks? A safe floor, in my opinion, is a running quarterback. And I've always said running quarterbacks are a cheat code. If you're going to take one thing away from this segment, running quarterbacks in 90% of formats, even a 6-point passing touchdown league, right? They're still a cheat code because they have that floor, and that's amazing. Set and forget at quarterback is so important. If you're touchdown dependent, you're going to have spike weeks. If it's your QB1, I personally, and when you're drafting Stroud and Lamar, you are looking for certainty. You don't want to whiff on your 3rd, 4th round pick. The stack is also much easier with Lamar as well. So that's something I don't think is something you can underestimate. It's much easier to get Mark Andrews on a kind of 3-4 turn split. But whilst there are more options available, and we'll talk about this in a bit, to Stroud in the passing game, who is he going to pass to? He's got 3 to 5 options on every play, whereas Lamar has got a very limited kind of read in that offense. So yeah, the stack is going to be diluted. So is it of value to you to have that stack with a wide receiver? Probably not. So maybe we ignore that. Maybe it's not a factor. But all of these things, thinking about the context of your decision rather than thinking, I think that X player is better than Y player. Break it down. Think about what they're going to do. Project. This is what the guys who do this for a living do. I don't do this for a living. I'm a amateur hobbyist plus, but I listen to a lot of this kind of stuff, and the way they talk about players in terms of the perceived value versus their recognized and actual value is all delivered through context, and you've got to understand the context that you're playing, and that's the difference between beginner players who just buy the names. They'll go for the names that they like. Everyone wants Patrick Mahomes. Everyone wants Josh Allen. They're going to go for him in the first round. Is that building value for your team? Maybe. I think that leagues are won on value building over time. And if you can secure a solid base of value with your picks by understanding this way of thinking to analyze two players that you might have in a choice, these are calculations that you've got to do on the fly, often when you're looking in drafts. But they're really important when you're looking at picking out lineups for the rest of your season. So I would always look at value to your team is who can score you the most points on a particular week. That's fine. Who's going to win your matchup, because there's a consideration there as well. So there's context within the matchup. If someone else is playing boom bust, are you going to play safe or are you going to play risky? And don't just believe the hype around instinctive value and name value. I don't think those things are real. Yes, you've got to trust your gut in some ways, and that'll be my next point. But context is really key. And provided you've gone through that way of thinking, you can feel comfortable with your decision. I think that makes you a better player. But what about just playing with your favorite players? And this is a valid strategy that I'm going to try out this year. There are always players you want to pick. I remember in one of my first ever drafts, I knew I just wanted Aaron Rodgers because I really loved him at the time. I thought he was fantastic. I think he was just coming off some kind of MVP season, or he was great. And I wanted to get him, and I wanted to get Gronk, and those were the two players. I think those were my first two picks. It's before I knew about how to do things. I wanted to play with him, so I did that. I drafted over above, but did I have fun? Yes, I did. And if you're going to have fun, you're probably going to do better because you're going to be more invested. And even though a favorite player only has kind of instinctive or intrinsic value to you, if you have a gut feeling on them, trust that gut sometimes, because it's going to make it more interesting. I'd say if you have a favorite player, a player you need on your team, I'd say, well, it's always in the right context, because the more engaged you are, even down to the player level, the more you're going to do to try to make that team a success. Because I don't want the Jonathan Taylor trio. That's a thing, right? I was just trying to make a pun on the. Anyway, I don't want my team themed around Jonathan Taylor to be a failure, so I'm going to make it a success. I've invested time and effort into understanding this player and into making the punny names, etc. I want to make it work. But I think there's a caveat to that, and I'm going to try this. And I think there is no harm in the first couple of rounds on going a bit off piece. Taking someone like Jonathan Taylor early while everyone's trying to get their wide receivers, because it's very wide receiver heavy this year in drafting. Taking a running back and zig while they zag, I think that is a perfectly reasonable way of doing things. So if you're in the 4 spot and you think JT has a possibility to be the number 1 running back off the board, go with it. That's much more appropriate than taking Baker Mayfield, who is a fun player. Regardless, there's no doubt there, and he's one of my kind of favorite players. I love watching him play, just very much on the edge the whole time. But if you take him 2 or 3 rounds earlier than ADP, that's going to look a bit funny. So that there are kind of context clues in there of not to have blinkers on. I understand what you're doing, but also be wary. This goes more for. I think it applies to redraft as well as Dynasty. Don't go in with blinkers on, and don't trade away all of your leverage, especially in Dynasty, for a vanity plate player. You are the insert Mahomes pun here team. You don't want to trade everything away, like Justin Jefferson, for example, to get that player on your team. To roster someone is a vanity thing. Yes, you can make it work if you're very invested, but you can also cripple yourself as well. So if you have favorites, your opponents are going to know. But you set against them, they're going to have favourites. Ask them, talk to them, they'll do the same. But it's tit for tat in this. If they think they can leverage your favourite against them, and you can them, everyone's going to try it. But I will be trying out a couple of drafts where I pick some favourite players in the kind of first, second, and third round, and see if I can make a team around them that I think really works. And I think that's going to be really fun. Now, I might try and take that into one of the active leagues that we talk about during the season. So that's the first two. Value, understand it. Context, intrinsic, instinctive, name value. These are all kind of value discussions that we've got to have. And I think playing with your favorite player makes you more invested. So if you're more invested, you're going to do better. And the next one, I'm going to pivot a little bit because I'm going to talk a bit more about draft, because we're coming into draft season, and might be able to tell I'm making some of this up on the fly. But I think there are there are so many unknowns at this time of year. I am 20 days away from some of my biggest drafts this year, and I still don't know who's going to be started. We haven't gone through the cuts of training camp and down to the 53 and understand who's going to be the number one in that lineup, etc. So what happens if you don't know who to pick? You've got an even pick, and I'm going to use examples of two teams that have a selection problem, let's call it. Now, I've talked about the Texans, I'll kind of briefly look at this, but the Texans have 5 options to throw to on any given play. And CJ Stroud is going to go through this, and he's going to be thinking, who do I want on my fantasy team? You've got Dell, the old college favorite. He's being drafted about pick 53 in ADP. You've got Nico Collins, the new hotness. He was obviously available for much more of last season. Everyone thinks he's going to be the number one, prototypical physique. Yeah, I like it. Being drafted at 30. Just ahead of him. I don't know why he's just ahead of him on ADP, because in drafts that I've been in actual, he's dropped so far. But you've got Stephon Diggs, but he is the quality caliber. He is the gold standard for wide receivers. He's fantastic, and in his prime, he can do fantastically. So maybe he's the number one read. You've got Joe Mixon, who is a pass catching running back. He is really good at it. Drafted at 48 at the moment. He's got a lot of value, but is he going to be in the right scheme? Can he do what he used to do at Cincinnati when he was obviously seen as a spare part? And then finally, you've got Dalton Schultz. Now, all of these guys are drafted roughly around the top 50, between 30 and 50. Dalton Schultz is down at 108. Yeah, he's not going to score as many points, but is he going to be a good red zone target? Yes, he is. Is he going to be a situational player? Yes, he is. I know out of those lot, if I've got a 12-person league, I've got a 4-round plus difference between the lowest, well, so maybe 6-round difference between the highest value player on the Texans receiving core to the lowest, who's still a starter. I'm picking the lowest. And that's what my kind of piece of advice to you, my third piece of advice, is in draft. If you don't know who to pick, go with the cheapest, because the only way is up in terms of value. You're not going to be disappointed if you whiff on a 9th round pick. You are going to be disappointed if you make the wrong decision on a 3rd round pick. And that's the difference we're looking at here. Dalton Schultz, probably around the 7th or 8th round, maybe 9th, maybe 10th, depending on what kind of league you're doing. Nico Collins is firmly in the 2nd or 3rd round of most drafts. It's crazy.
Okay, so welcome back. Been a while since I've recorded between these two. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm in a different location. I'm recording from my sofa late at night because I'm trying to get this out before I go on holiday. And it's been a little while. I've even had a haircut, if you're so observant as well, and grown out my beard, so you can definitely see the grey in that. Anyway, back to the content at hand. And for those audio listeners, yes, I do have greys in my beard. I'm 35 and proud of it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the recommended kind of steps you should be taking in your draft. Are not in your draft, in just fantasy in general. The 201. These are the 5 main points that I think are really important. And just to recap, we've got the contextual versus instinctive value. You've got to really understand what value means. I do think that playing with your favourite players and is really important because it brings importance to the game. And I've talked about, if you don't know who to pick, go with the cheapest. And I've talked a lot about the Texans, and in this break, I just wanted to kind of highlight another view as well. So I'm going to give you an option of 4 players, or 2 groups of 2 players. Let's look at it. Okay, who would you rather have? someone who is drafted ADP 165, 700 yards on 59 catches from 96 targets, 8 TDs in 17 games. Or someone who's drafted at the 75 spot, 800 yards on 64 receptions from 94 targets, 8 TDs in 17 games. Do you know who those two are? I know who I'd go for. With the difference in stats, 100 yards being pretty much the only difference, which is 10 points over the course of the season, plus another 5 receptions. He's actually getting targeted more. It's Romeo Dobbs and Jaden Reed, sorry, from the Green Bay Packers. So I know who I'd. I want to pick the cheapest. I've talked about that already. Picking the cheapest can be incredibly powerful because the upside is there for you. You can go for a more solid player in the middle rounds. Okay, another 2 players here. Let's look at this example then. We've got a player. I'm not going to tell you the ADP. We've got a player 400 yards on 28 receptions from 53 targets last year over 9 games. Bearing in mind 4 TDs, or so he's done 600 on 39 from 58 targets, 4 TDs again over 15 games. Now, I'd probably say it's a bit more of a fair fight because you've got a player who's maybe scored more who's scored as much in fewer games. But if I told you the first one was once again 2 Green Bay Packers players, Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks are those 2 players, drafted 101 and 167 respectively, I'm taking Wicks every time. Not just because not for the stats reason, but because availability is probably the best ability there, and again for the upside. Watson there, I think the smaller sample size is really indicative of the fact that he's quite a streaky player, and we've always talked about him being a streaky player. So anyway, if you want a safe floor, I pick the player who is going to be cheaper. Whilst I want a guy who's in the flex really, so I'm going to go for availability. That's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for the upside. I'm going to draft capital savings there, and we talk a lot about value-based drafting, and I will get into that in the draft 201 as well. Value-based drafting and the other concepts that you can explore there. And I know value-based drafting is on the way out, but I think a mix of strategies as you draft is really important. And later on, value-based drafting is the best. When you're weighing up between a 7th round and a 10th round pick here, or even a 12th or 13th, 14th round in the case of Romeo Dobbs here, take the cheaper one because you can get so much more value in the upper rounds. So that just ties up point 3 there. Okay, we're going to point 4 now. In-season management, I think, leads to draft success. No, actually, no, that's not even what I meant to say. In-season management is more important than draft success. Now, I think I am a big proponent of taking risks in the draft. Balanced risks, considered risks, yes, but this year, to win more, I'm going to take more risks in the draft. That might mean I lose heavier, but if I back myself to do great in-season management, it shouldn't matter. I mean, if you don't take any risks in the draft, you might make it to the playoffs. And I've done this so many times where I've taken a very measured approach, but your team won't change as much because you've made decisions on regular starters. You'll be hard pushed to pull the trigger on any mid-season or late-season trades or waivers to turn that team into one that can win when it counts, because you've got there based on high draft capital players that you haven't taken a risk on, players that you know are solid performers or who are name brands. I don't like that as much. Having considered that some of the only times I've won were with waiver wire pickups like Rashard Penny in week 15, that kind of thing. That's what wins championships. And I question, what are you here for? Are you here to get in the playoffs or to win the championship? We're all here to win the championship, aren't we? If you take risks late in the draft with sleepers, etc., you're likely to get a higher ceiling than floor. The floor of a player in the 12th round is not going to be great. His ceiling might not be great either, but if you can get a little bit of an edge with a ceiling player, that's what I really mean. And by ceiling, by the way, I mean a player who has the propensity to be a big scorer. A handcuff for a running back who's really good on a really good team with a great offensive line like Elijah Mitchell in years gone past has come to mind. Zach Charbonnet these days I think is really good pick as well, maybe a bit more expensive, but rarely do I see teams who've got like kind of distinctly average scores who've done well, who've gone with safe picks, go throughout the year and take it all. They might have the best season record, in-season record, but the best season record doesn't matter when you get to the playoffs. You want people who can make a late charge, and the players, as in the fancy players, who manage their team well with a boom bust consideration. And a few times it goes wrong, but you can afford to go wrong in season. What you can't afford to go wrong is in the playoffs. But equally, can you afford to play it safely in the playoffs? That's why I think that in-season management is more important than draft success. You can lose your... Can you win or lose a championship in the draft? Potentially. I think you're more likely to lose it in the draft by... Well, lose your season in the draft by being too conservative. And I believe that in-season management is more engaging. And if you're more engaged, you're more likely to make better decisions to benefit your team because you have something to be in there for. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. So I think my fourth point here is in-season management is more important than draft success. Don't let draft day be the day your season ends. And the final thing is more of a soft, nicer, I guess, take-home message here. Is get involved. I've been in a lot of leagues, still am, and the leagues that go well are ones where you have a level of engagement that is really key. You might be because you're work friends or close friends, or I've got uni friends and various wives and girlfriends in there as well now. And not my wife, I don't have a girlfriend. My wife is distinctly not interested in this, and I think a good marriage is something. Yeah, maybe this is a piece of bonus advice. A good marriage is a consequence of balances and understanding that you can be passionate about something without actually caring about it, or the partner can be passionate about something without you caring about it. You just appreciate them for being them, and yeah, I hope my wife does. I don't think anything wrong with that. Anyway, it's too late. I'm getting off track here. My piece of advice here is get involved. You will get so much more out of fantasy football if you get involved. Please do. I've been in so many leagues where people don't get involved, and whenever I start up a league, or I've got one that I've got an existing manager, I'm a commissioner of 3 leagues now. I get people involved, and by talking to your league mates, you get more trading, which is more engaging. You get to discuss up and coming players. I don't think it's a case of hiding information. Information is not there to be hidden. You can highlight the diverse player base, which then gives you more opportunities to talk to other people about it and have more trades. The people I trade with are the most active people, and that makes it more fun. And so many people get FOMO that they don't trade. And say, oh, why didn't you often do that trade? Because you don't talk, you don't get involved here. I would love to have people writing their opinions on the league, get everyone hyped up, start doing rankings and create banter and rivalries and stuff like that. And that's why I created this podcast. This podcast is a function of my love for my leagues, and I want to show my league mates how much I really value them. And yeah, I love to create stories out of the rivalries that we do have. In each of the leagues I have, I create these various positions. League historian is an idea, power rankings owner, salary cap owner, which we're doing a franchise league. We'll do a deep dive into that at some point. Waiver czar, who gets the ruling over the last thing and can make up rules around how prioritisation is kept. Deputy commissioner is always really good. If at some point you're going to want to go on holiday, do that. Lord of Free Agency is an interesting one. That again was a franchise one, but being able to organise the rules around waivers, etc., and how players are managed, have a bidding system. That's great. And the draft obviously is the most important thing. Have a dedicated draft manager. As a commissioner, if you are a commissioner, it's a lot of work just keeping people in line. If you have support from even a third of the rest of your league mates, it makes such a difference, and I'm really looking forward to telling you some fantastic stories about that. I mean, some of these roles are league specific, but others you can apply to all leagues. I've started doing this, and we started out as power rankings, and now I'm trying to instill from that what good a commissioner can do by getting people involved, getting more people interested, and all of a sudden they're asking, oh, what more can I do? Why is he doing that? Well, I don't want to miss out, and you get more and more. And with that kind of get involved, there is a bonus request I've got for you guys. It's don't give up if you've got no hope. Now, it's an extension of that go hope, that try to get involved. And the no hope is when you're 3-10, you've got no chance of getting the playoffs, all this kind of stuff. At that point, I would ask your commissioner to give those not in the running something to play for. Because by giving up at that point, you spoil it for others. You're not involved in the waivers. You're not involved in the competition. You just let the top two guys, or guys or girls, just fight it out, and that's not as fun for everyone. As the good book, i.e., the Fantasy Bible says, "Do unto others as you would have done unto you." And you will be blessed with a great draft position the following year. Yeah, I know. Yeah, sacrilegious sentiments aside, is that alliteration? Yeah, a kind of sibilance. But that sacrificial metaphor aside, it's really important that you stay involved because you don't want to spoil it for other players and leave them with a sour taste. And you don't want to have an asterisk over that league win, and no one does. So they're going to want to have you play to your hardest ability every week, even if there's nothing to play for. Don't tank. It's not fun if you're going to tank tactfully. Tank tactfully. Wow, that's a tongue twister at this late at night. Anyway, you can see it's getting late, but those are my 5.5 pieces of advice here. Contextual versus instinctive value. It's really important to understand what that means to you and your team, and to understand your league as well. It's really, really important. Playing with your favourite players is really important, and I've done a lot of that recently. I've been finding players I like to watch. Receiver was great for that. I'm sure when I start watching Hard Knocks, I'll be all over some Bears players. I want more of DJ Moore probably. If you don't know who to pick, go with the cheapest option, and that is in backfield committees and all that kind of stuff. Wide receiver rooms that are undecided. Yeah, there are only a few teams like that, but Texans, Packers, to a lesser extent, the Raiders are like that as well. I would say the Titans as well. If you're going to pick Nuke over Calvin Ridley, consider the draft capital and who's going to be available as well. It's really important. In-season management is more important than draft success. Your league year does not end at the draft. It's not set and forget. You have to be involved, and that's the last one. Get involved. And aside from the bonus points of a healthy marriage is born out of mutual disinterest, as I think was the kind of paraphrasing it. And don't give up. Just don't give up. You always have something to play for, and there's always next year. But we want to make this year as good for everyone as possible, and that is what I think makes the fantasy football community so powerful, because we give a monkeys about playing and we enjoy it. So we want other people to enjoy it too. So don't give up on it, and make sure it's enjoyable for others. Anywho, that is going to be it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry this has been a bit of a gap between the episodes, and if you're watching on YouTube, this has been a bit jarring that you had to see my face this close up. Without any decent background. I might put something up there so you see something. I will be back in the next few days, hopefully with a couple of draft episodes. It might be smaller because I'm going to record them and chop them up so you can divide them through the week. You can support the pod as usual via rugbywithpads.com. That'll take you to our Buy Me a Coffee page. That's where you can get merch. £1 gets you access to all the premium features, plus all my kind of newsletters and all that kind of stuff early. You'll get them a day or two early, so you can get ahead of your league mates. Plus the as yet to be released draft rankings and stuff like that. I'm going to start doing that, and I'll probably do mid-season rankings as well for you guys as well. So you'll get access to all that for as little as £1. Pay it once, counts if you need to, but just anything to support the pod, because I want this to be an endeavour that we can continue on without it draining me dry. Anyway, thank you so much if you've listened this far. I really appreciate it. And as always, I will see you on the virtual gridiron.